All right, for the balance of this hour, we are joined by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former editor at the Wall Street Journal, former head of policy at the Department of the Treasury, best-selling author, syndicated columnist as well. His latest article is at Infowars.com, Unplugging Americans from the Matrix. It's also on his website, which, of course, is paulcraigroberts.org. Excellent website as well. And he joins us here today to talk about a host of issues, the latest in the police state, what's happening in our world, and what he means by unplugging Americans from the Matrix. And then I have a point I want to raise to him as well on another subject. All over the U.S., they're giving kids vaccines without parental consent. They are now taking DNA from school children. I have the Daily Mail here. It's also in the Associated Press. Regardless of whether the individual is an adult or juvenile, they are capable of giving consent. We don't require the consent of a parent if we're doing it with someone of a younger age. These are 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, said Deputy Jason Ramos of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, because a dead girl was found back in the woods. How do we know it wasn't a cop did it? You know, statistically, nowadays, that they are higher crime rates than the general public. You look at real criminology. You didn't know that? Or a school teacher. They're much higher than the cops. Or a truancy officer. You know, these pervs in government. Maybe a TSA agent did it. You know, oh, no, we're going to get all the 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. We're going to take their DNA, and we're going to give them vaccines and say, is it all right with you, little girl, little boy? Dr. Roberts, I just sprung that on you out of the gates, but everybody knows if a perv grabs a 10-year-old and says, well, the 10-year-old wanted to have sex or wanted to smoke crack cocaine, no, the child can't give consent. But now the government, all over the country, I'm seeing little governments say, we got your child to say they wanted an abortion at 10. We got the child to say they wanted a vaccine. We got the child to give us DNA. What do you make of this new mega level of corruption?
Well, we're not even serfs, are we? I mean, Americans no longer have the rights even of 19th century slaves, and we accept it. And what's really so funny is that all these patriot flag-waving guys who think they're so macho tough, they're just sheep. They accept all this. What's the difference from what you've just said? And, you know, by 2015, apparently they're going to have black boxes in our cars, recording everywhere we go. Somebody said, before you can get in your car and start it up, you first have to get permission. Tell them where you're going, when you'll be back. You know, we've been going on about this for so long, haven't we? And it just keeps getting worse.
Listen, Forbes attacked me for an article at Infowars.com that got all this going. And so did the New Atlantic, saying, well, they've been tracking some of what you've done for a decade or more. Yeah, these will track everything you do, but what's wrong with that? Why do you think Petraeus came out a month ago and said, yeah, your clock radio's watching you and listening and smart meters. There's no Fourth Amendment anymore. I mean, he actually, why do you think they're in our face like this?
Well, I suppose they're just getting rid of any accountable government. You know, supposedly we have an accountable government and we can hold them accountable through elections and through law, and the government's supposed to hold itself accountable through law. But beginning with the Bush-Cheney-Obama regime, all of that's out. The executive branch is no longer accountable to law, whether domestic or international. In fact, law is whatever the executive branch says. And then this filters down to the executive branches at state and local levels. So I think the legislatures are essentially impotent. They still exist, you know, kind of like the Roman Senate under the Caesars, but they don't have any real role. The executive branch can do whatever it wants, and so can the police in most instances.
You're right, and it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. I'm sure you saw the big announcements. We already knew this was happening, but now it's admitted. Undercover TSA on the streets and in buses, and just, they admit, listening to our conversations, it violates the 10th Amendment. You're not supposed to have feds out doing that. They're not even really real officers. And then, oh, I meant to have my crew in here today, Darren McBreen and Marcos Morales. I guess Monday I'll have them in and tell the story, or Sunday. They flew out up to Georgia where the guy's house blew up who had the chickens there in Roswell, Georgia. And the police told him, you can't tape the City Hall building, period, or we'll arrest you. That's on video. And we think it's suspicious that he died, but they say his house blew up and that he did it. But then flying out, they said, we're not going in the scanners. So they made him wait about 40 minutes and almost missed their flight and kept walking over laughing at him, saying, oh, you're an opt-out. You're going to miss your flight, laughing. And then they said, we're going to grope you. And the guy put his glove on. And the way Marcos describes it, and Darren saw it, popped the glove, Doc, and said, everybody deserves a little pleasure.
You know, we accept, the population accepts it. It all goes back to what we've said so many times, 9/11. The population fell for 9/11. That's been the excuse for everything else. And there's no real reason for them to be going around listening to conversations on the street because there are no terrorist acts. We've made that point too many times, right? There's no terrorism in the United States except what the FBI orchestrates. And of course, other than the terrorism of our own government, state, local, and federal. But it's an excuse, and they've taken it to grab all sorts of power and to establish all kinds of precedents. And essentially, the United States is a police state that masquerades as a democracy. You know, that it was a very interesting set of articles that Ron Utz has in the American Conservative. I wrote about them. It's my latest article about unplugging the matrix. And Ron Utz looks at the propagandistic picture of China in the United States, and then he looks at the real picture of the two, and he finds out that actually the so-called authoritarian government of China is more responsive to the Chinese people than the so-called freedom and democracy government of America is to the American people. He finds out also, he shows also that the Chinese government is more accountable to law than the American government, and also has a far more successful economic policy with the real incomes of Chinese workers doubling every decade for the last 3 decades, while the real incomes of Americans have been stagnant or declining. So wherever you look, if you take off the blinders and you get out of the matrix and look at the real facts, the United States, the people here, they live in an artificial, propagandistic, or virtual reality that's not really real. And that's what I meant about unplugging them. You know, it's a reference to the film, you know, with Neo and
how do you do that? That's what you're asking. It's an excellent piece. I mean, how do you get people who think the world is just there and they're not part of it, and they just believe whatever they're told when we see every, you know, people always blame the Germans. How do they let this happen? Well, their country was destroyed in a war, totally in depression, and Hitler didn't even get elected to a full position. He used it to get power later. I mean, he got elected, but, you know, not the, you know, with 50% of the vote. And that's how it happened. It happens where criminals seize control and people don't know how bad it's going to be, and then they get in control, and everybody just starts saying yes, yes, yes.
That's it. But the United States is a police state. There's no doubt about it. And everything you said at the beginning of our conversation points to that, as well as everything that we've said in all of our conversations over the years, Alex. you may remember the executive orders or the national security directives or whatever they were called of the Bush regime about how they could take over the government and ignore the Congress. You remember how we used to discuss that? And they get worse and worse. The one Obama issued is even worse, apparently, than the one Bush issued. And, you know, nobody blinks. And they cart off 6-year-old girls to jail and handcuffs because they have temper tantrums and charge them with felonies. And no one says, what is this? What? I mean, I don't even think Hitler or Stalin went that far.
Well, that's right, Doc. And I have another question for you. Then I want to get into the economy. And you also sent us an article about Fukushima. I want to get your take on that. But taking folks to the Drudge Report right now, we have the top right-hand link. Climate alarmist calls for burning down skeptics' homes. And they're always talking like this. But this is a big senior writer at Forbes saying burn down our houses, find out who we are, and then burn down our houses. And I see Al Gore saying they want an environmental spring here so they can get their carbon tax. And then separately, they have CISPA and SOPA, and they admit they want to start censoring people and shutting down websites without due process. I mean, Doc, I think we're getting to the point where they might actually shut us down.
That's right. I think you're right. I mean, why shouldn't they? What's to stop them? Look, we've already reached the point where the Department of Homeland Security a couple of years ago said they were no longer mainly focused on terrorism. They were now focused on domestic extremists. And we had the episode where they went into the homes of the war protesters, the activists, and took the computers, and they're trying to make a case against them before grand juries that criticizing the war is the same as giving aid and comfort to the terrorists.
Amazing.
That's what they're trying to do.
Wow.
And you see what they've done to Julian Assange and to Bradley Manning, to all the whistleblowers who are supposed to be protected by law, but aren't because the government doesn't pay attention to the law.
You know, that's a bombshell point you just made, hiding in plain view. They are grabbing peaceful anti-war activists. And I saw this under Bush, where they tried a case out in California, and I saw the Deputy Attorney General. It was under a Democrat. His name was Calhoun. He was in the newspaper. I'll still remember, because I read it on air over and over again. It was like in 2004, and it was in the Oakland newspaper. He said, protesting the war aids terrorists because the war is against terror, and so you need to be arrested, and now they're actually trying it. I mean, that is so un-American, so anti-freedom that you can't be against war and that they're going to arrest you. That's the total proof right there.
That's right, and it's not even a short step to the point that if you criticize the government, you are against us, not with us. Remember how Bush phrased it, you're with us or you're against us. Well, if you criticize them on any grounds, then you're against them. And so you can be picked up or shut up or whatever they want to do. You know, the most amazing thing to me was when the Obama official announced, proud to Obama himself, that they had a list of American citizens that they were going to assassinate without due process. And nobody said anything. There was no uproar. Congress didn't say, what do you mean? They didn't call hearings. The law schools didn't explode in anger. The federal courts didn't. The bar associations didn't. A few isolated individuals said something about it. You know, I said something. Glenn Greenwald said something. Probably Harvey Silverglade, you know, a few others. But most people just, it was water off the duck's back there. This is what I say. They're all plugged in. They're all in the matrix. And at the end of my article, you know, I quote from the film where it's being explained to Neo that the people they're actually trying to save, whose minds they're trying to save by unplugging them, will actually fight them to the death to stay plugged in. And that's, you know, you have a large following, but the vast majority of the people, they don't want to be unplugged. And so this helps the government. This is why the government can continue. It's very easy to steal people's liberties and freedoms and rights when they're in the matrix because they like it.
Well, but that's my next question, but I want to read the quote that you just mentioned. Why does the establishment want to go to this police state? What are they getting ready for? But let me read the quote you're talking about. The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we're trying to save. But until we do, these people are still part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. Yeah, they're like drowning people. They try to take you under. You have to understand most of these people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so injured, so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it. Most of the people I know personally are not willing to be unplugged. I assume my readers are, so seize the opportunity to be further unplugged and read Ron Unez's comparison of America and China. Well, look at China now says they're going to use the model of the NDAA to create their own NDAA. The communist Chinese now get aid and succor for their police state from America. We're now the model of evil.
I'm afraid that's true. But I think we're more of a police state than China, and the government here is less accountable than in China. And when Ron Utz compares the case of the Chinese infant formula that was diluted or mixed with something to make it go further, that introduced illness and death, killed about 300 babies. But all heads rolled in China, and some people were even executed. But when Merck's drug caused 500,000 heart attacks, nothing's happened.
By the way, Paul Watson, who writes for PrisonPlanet.com, his wife is Chinese, so he goes there like 2 or 3 times a year now. Yeah. He says it's incredibly free compared to England, and he walks right on the plane, right off. In many ways, I tell you, that's scary, and I've had people on and explain that to them who don't go to China, and they argue with me. But Paul guarantees it.
Yeah, well, I was there in 2006, and there's no sign of a police state. And the Chinese officials I met with had sincere concern with the Chinese people and making things work, improve them. And they had draconian punishments for corruption. And the elite that misbehaves, they just wipe them out. They don't tolerate it. And here it's totally the opposite. But anyhow, Ron Utz is a very careful thinking, a thoughtful person, and he's brave, which is rare.
Stay there. Tell us about him on the other side and a little bit on this Fukushima situation. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is our guest. Dr. Roberts, you were getting to the point of this researcher, author. You were saying a very careful guy, but also brave in your words. Finish up with that, and then I want to ask you the question, why is the ruling class getting rid of all the due process? Because from my study of history, it's generally the ruling class that gets destroyed when they up front get greedy and get rid of any due process.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. Historically is correct. It was the upper class who wanted to bring in law to protect themselves and their property from the power of kings, because the kings were above the law, the kings were the law, and all that sort of thing. And this was achieved in England, and we inherited it. So apparently the elite think they've got some other power now, and they no longer need the protection of law, and so they're taking it away from us so that they can do to us what they want. That's what it looks like. But who knows? It could just be the drive for power. All of these police agencies want power, and they want less constraints. And so it could simply have been that 9/11, the way that played, has just been used to take away restraints against the use of arbitrary power. That it may be that simple, or they may have some plan. I don't know. I really don't know.
I agree with you. All I know is, historically, it's deadly dangerous, and if people aren't concerned out there, something's wrong with them.
That's right. Well, there is something wrong with them. They're plugged in the matrix.
now
They live in virtual reality, an artificial world. They have no idea what's true, what's false. They're propagandized by the media. Not too many of them get any alternative information. It's just the way it is.
Why do you think Forbes would let a writer come out and say, burn people's houses down that are climate skeptics?
I don't know.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Well, see, it looks like neither side of any issue wants any debate. They just want to impose their view. They're completely sold on the rightness of their view, and everybody else is wrong, and so you come to war. You come to war against each other. Nobody wants to listen to see what the truth doesn't mean anything anymore. It's what I believe it is truth, and I don't want to question it because I don't want to find out if it's wrong or if there's some other explanation. So it's very hard to get any kind of discussion. I mean, even in scholarship, it's hard. The minds are closed for the most part.
It is. It's bizarre studying history. It's a very strange time. Briefly, we're almost out of time. I hope you have a great weekend coming up. 60 seconds on the economy and its further deterioration. And now they're saying, oh, maybe austerity's not good in Europe. It's making the economy shut down.
Yes, that's true. That's what austerity will do. Well, for us, there's no recovery. Nothing's changed. All the money and debt that's being created may come back and bite us in higher prices, and we may be headed for a real problem of a combination of rising prices and falling employment, and there's no solution to that. So we're creating the possibility of the worst economic crisis in our history, and they're blind. They're blind to it. They continue preoccupation with the banks. Save the banks, screw everybody else. That's the policy here. That's the policy in Europe.
Amazing job. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Have a great weekend, Doctor.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, there goes Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. You can find out more at his website, and we've got links to it up on Infowars.com. I'll be back. Well, Mike Adams is back Sunday with the Sunday radio show. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?
It's for slaves, and we accept it. And what's really so funny is that all these patriot flag-waving guys who think they're so macho tough, they're just sheep. They accept all this. What's the difference from what you've just said? And, you know, by 2015, apparently they're going to have black boxes in our cars, recording everywhere we go. Somebody said, before you can get in your car and start it up, you first have to get permission. Tell them where you...
Of course, is paulcraigroberts.org. Excellent website as well. And he joins us here today to talk about a host of issues, the latest in the police state, what's happening in our world, and what he means by unplugging Americans from the matrix. And then I have a point I want to raise to him as well on another subject. All over the U.S., they're giving kids vaccines without parental consent. They are now taking DNA from school children. I have the Daily Mail here. It's also in the Associated Press. Is it all right with you, little girl, little boy? Dr. Roberts, I just sprung that on you out of the gates, but everybody knows if a perv grabs a 10-year-old and says, well, the 10-year-old wanted to have sex or wanted to smoke crack cocaine, no, the child can't give consent. But now the government, all over the country, I'm seeing little governments say, we got your child to say they wanted an abortion at 10. We got the child to say they wanted a vaccine. We got the child to give us DNA. What do you make of this new mega level of corruption?
Well, we're not even serfs, are we? I mean, Americans no longer have the rights even of 19th century.
All right. right, for the balance of this hour, we are joined by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former editor at the Wall Street Journal, former head of policy at the Department of the Treasury, best-selling author, syndicated columnist, as well. His latest article is at Infowars.com, Unplugging Americans from the Matrix. It's also on his website, which, regardless of whether the individual is an adult or juvenile, they are capable of giving consent. We don't require the consent of a parent if we're doing it with someone of a younger age. These are 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, said Deputy Jason Ramos of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, because a dead girl was found back in the woods. How do we know it wasn't a cop did it? You know, statistically, nowadays, that they are higher crime rates than the general public. You look at real criminology. You didn't know that? Or a school teacher. They're much higher than the cops. Or a truancy officer. You know, these pervs in government. Maybe a TSA agent did it. You know, oh, no, we're going to get all the 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. We're going to take their DNA, and we're going to give them vaccines and say,